Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq Market Site, we have Tony Perrotta, Sustainability and Regenerative Economy Expert at PA Consulting, as well as Jason Dodier, co-founder and COO of Grain Ecosystem. We're here to discuss why organizations and governments must future-proof systems against growing environmental risks and the shift to active resilience. It is great to have the both of you with us. Welcome back to the show. This is going to be an interesting topic. I can sense the chemistry as it stands right now. And let's start high level here, Tony. Sure. Moving to active resiliency instead of sustainability. It sounds like there's a nuance there.
There is a nuance. That, in essence, we're moving away from what is typically an esoteric notion of sustainability into concrete active resiliency. And what that means is a true drive for communities, corporations, and countries to really look at how can they thrive in an environment that's going to continue to be unstable. How do you secure the resources, the power, the water, the input materials you need for energy independence and to continue to thrive successfully into the future?
Yeah, and Jason, I think it's interesting that nuance when it comes to the world's sustainability. It's not necessarily sustainability in terms of the environmental sense, but sustainability in terms of long-termism as well.
Exactly right. And Tony, as you said, Swiss Re in the past, $310 billion tied to climate-related disasters. To put that in perspective, just the forest fires we saw in California, Jill, $250 billion. Resilience is security, especially for island nations and places like Manhattan, Rhode Island, where is my home state. So we need to implement long-term, highly impactful programs that are going to protect, but also help these communities flourish. And we're going to talk about some of those technologies on the show today, but that's perspective.
And as a CEO, you have to realize that you're equally as likely of getting put out of business by climate change as you are your own competitive landscape. That's a true resonance in the financial markets, and you need to shore that resiliency up.
Why is that?
Without the ability to procure the materials you need at the prices you expect, you can imagine the chaos that ensues. You have unstable supply chains, and you can't meet what should be growing demand.
So, Jason, there's a growing need for technologies, and you're tackling multiple challenges at once. So tell us about an area where there's a lot of focus as it relates to tackling these challenges.
Well, a major focus, and I've been speaking about this frequently, is if you think about society and how far we've come, and history obviously repeating itself and leveraging the things of the past, one of the things I would want to call out is biochar in particular. You know, when you think about biochar, the genius in biochar is the technology old as fire, but it's also something that is really the bedrock of what we have in the future. And what you're doing, Jill, essentially is you're heating up organic waste streams at high temperatures in the absence of oxygen. It was known, Tony, as terra preta thousands of years ago in Brazil, this really rich soil content. And what we're trying to do here in the US today is turn these waste streams, as Tony was alluding to, into economic revenue streams. So here's the cost of capital story and how you improve communities, but you're also be able to tap into carbon credits, tax credits, and then hopefully get rid of harmful chemicals, fertilizers, and other things. And over time, you're decarbonizing hard to abate sectors when you think about the role of biochar.
And the beauty is it can be implemented today. It's a super lever when it comes to the challenges we're facing. It addresses multiple issues at its core and is available to implement today.
Give us a higher level overview of exactly what biochar is. What are you extracting? What is it being turned into? And what's the use of it?
I think Jason, actually, this is his core competency. Do you want to?
Yes.
Yeah. I'd be honored to do it. And by the way, we see biochar becoming in its own right, a $6 to $7 billion market industry in the next 5 to 6 years. But ultimately, some of the outputs, when you think about, first of all, how do you produce it?
Right.
We work with, or we see sugar mills, lumber mills, timber mills. You think about woody biomass. So think about the Bahamas as an example. You have a lot of invasive species, casuarina trees. Hurricane Dorian, 1 million tons of woody biomass and other debris. You take that, you pyrolyze, and you create output. Typically, it's a solid, a liquid, and a gas. So you could create high quality electricity, so redundancy, mini microgrids. The biochar itself can be used as a soil amendment, so you're improving the microbial nature of the soil. You're improving your yields and reducing the input costs. So your cost structure is going out. You need less water, as an example. Other outputs that you could leverage biochar for, of course, is PFAS remediation. As I said earlier, we're seeing massive amounts of Superfund sites across the United States right now, soils that are loaded with PFAS in our drinking water. So how do you leverage biochar there? And then you think about, I was recently in Iowa, it's the state with the second highest rate of cancer in the country. A lot of that is due to runoff from the nitrous oxide, the phosphorus in the soils. So biochar remedies that. And the last thing, Jill, that I would flag today that we're seeing as an additive for producing concrete, steel, asphalt. Think about the heat islands here in Manhattan. How do we decarbonize around the different local laws and ambitions here? It's a great way to do it, especially with a public-private partnership lens.
Right, but cement uses a lot of water.
It's one of the most carbon-intensive industries globally. And then to answer your question generally on what is biochar and how does it work, in essence, you're taking what is typically a biologic material, plant-based material, you're heating it through pyrolysis or another method, and you're locking that carbon in long term so it doesn't escape in the atmosphere. That at its basic core is the sense of the concept.
Does it exist at scale? Is this something that we can do now?
It can. It exists today. In addition to that, there are some amazing companies like Avenger here in the US, Adven, Blue Sky Carbon, all that are looking to accelerate even the efficiency today to go well beyond what we see in the current environment.
And even putting it in a bigger perspective, look at a company like Nestle. So we've got 2 billion tons of coffee byproduct waste that goes into landfills globally a year. Nespresso, which is a division within Nestle, makes delicious coffee. We're using the coffee waste. They're currently testing it in South America and Brazil and turning that into biochar that is then going to farmers, and the farmers are able to use that as a soil amendment. And we'll obviously talk about what Nestle is doing on the plastics front as well, but it's incredible what they're doing with biochar.
It seems as if a lot of this does come down to, from an investment perspective, what the value is and the economics behind the investment. Are there challenges associated with that, and what are some of them?
Absolutely. These technologies need to prove that they can exist financially and sustainably, and by sustainability we do mean financially there, so long-termism. To be able to do that, they need to show beyond prototype, real true mass scale and commercialization. In the example of biochar, we can do that today. That's a well-proven case. With other new alternative materials, there still is a case study that we need to do. The example I would offer is alternative materials, seaweeds, fiber, alginates. Those are proven at lab scale and commercial pilot scale, but they really need to ramp up quickly.
I think it's interesting you noted that the Chief Financial Officer is now evolving to include some of the direct activities of the Chief Sustainability Officer.
Yeah, so if you think back a decade and a half to 2 decades ago, you saw the transformation of the Chief Marketing Officer and the Chief Information Officer come together. We're seeing the same thing happen with the CFO and the Chief Sustainability Officer. The finance org has the discipline, the rigor, and the protocols to understand compliance, audits, and regulatory landscape. Candidly, the sustainability team doesn't have that skill set, so bringing them together makes sense.
Well, I mean, that's the question. Are the skill sets available? Because climate regulation and compliance to that is something that's relatively new.
Yes, but again, you've got a core team who already deals with a vastly dynamic landscape when it comes to financial compliance and auditing. You're adding one more pillar to that stack.
I'm going to ask you about the innovation within material science, carbon storing materials as an example. So carbon, you can't see it, right? Just like you can't see electricity. How do you capture it? How do you store it? What do you do with it? How do you value it?
So one example is right here, a company called Carbon Quest. In buildings today, what they're essentially doing is they're capturing the carbon emissions from boilers in these buildings. They're essentially cooling that, liquefying it, shipping it out, and injecting it in concrete as an example. That's one way we're starting to see the quantification. But it always, as Tony says, it always comes back to a math problem in terms of economics and returns. So one of the big things that's been in the news, I really appreciate Climeworks for being as transparent as they have been. If you look at their big direct air capture project, particularly Mammoth, which was in Iceland, Jill, one of the big things that we saw there was originally that project was going to be able to sequester, essentially pull out of the air about 36,000 metric tons a year. What we've seen to date, net, it's about 150 tons, so 720 pulled, but you also have to think about the value chain and the critical materials and science-backed resources that go into building these facilities. So I think you really have to, we have to take a long, hard look into the economics and think about what are you getting? A ton is a ton, but for the dollar invested in sequestering or removing carbon, how do you, don't nuance them and mix carbon sequestration with direct air capture. A lot of people bucket them in the same discussion, and it's a huge problem.
Quantify that for us, though. The amount that's captured and how it can be reused. How many football fields does that fill, or how many buildings does it power?
Yeah, so theoretically, just to put it in perspective, a ton of carbon that's sequestered from direct air capture, it's about it will cost about $1,000 a ton, which is important to note. Now, their vision originally with that 36,000 tons a year, I think that would power roughly a small community, a small neighborhood was the vision. And the thought was we go modular. You go modular, but you create a big, exceptional solution set leveraging modular technologies. And that's where the biochar story comes back full scope, is because you're getting 5 to 20 times return for that dollar invested. So imagine the 2.7 billion plus, I think, in 2023 that was invested in direct air capture. If you're able to get some of that money into biochar, and that million tons I referenced earlier about the Bahamas, that would essentially, you could sequester 680,000 tons, turning that into biochar, and that would help the Bahamas achieve about 7% of basically their goal against the Paris Agreement. So for perspective.
Wow, that's pretty substantial. How about the integration of AI and sustainability? I'm imagining that some of these emerging technologies are helping to advance this as well.
Absolutely. I see two key areas. One, recycling. So AI can help power vision technology, preventative maintenance, et cetera. But beyond that, also we're realizing that AI connected to satellite imaging allows us to detect methane leaks more readily. So Methane Sat and some other Google collaborations are allowing us to see those leaks as they happen and plug them. For reference, methane is 80 times more damaging than carbon is. Not to suggest that carbon is not a massive issue, but tackling the both in combination really make for a potent team.
It's interesting. It sounds as if even how we think about recycling and how we're managing waste is evolving along with this.
Yes, so the plastics problem, immensely complex. We're making too much of it, we're recycling too little of it, and we can't ignore the health implications, so they're continuing to grow. So finding, again, what we're excited about, alternative materials and better ways to reuse the materials that exist today.
And I would say one thing, Tony, on that point, on the methane piece and thinking about the oil and gas space, we have 3 million abandoned oil wells in the U.S. So just to close the loop on your carbon piece, we could leverage that for carbon sequestration. You could do geothermal, which is a great baseload technology. But the methane piece, I think we don't talk about it enough. There's a lot of leakage happening with these wells. So figuring out how do we bring AI to the table to detect rapidly and come up with solutions in real time.
And that is a financial concept anyone can understand. Waste equals less performance, less profit, et cetera.
Bingo.
I mean, well, we have plenty of waste here, that's for sure.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a great market to do something with that waste. What about AI-driven waste solutions as it relates to grain? What are you working on?
There's a couple of things. So the first thing, for one of the reasons we started grain, and I spent as many years living internationally and working with project developers all over the world, the costs associated with thinking about doing a project, it's out of reach for a lot of people. So leveraging AI and digitization to just understand, am I eligible for this project? How do I optimize for success? You have wet feedstocks like manures, you have dry feedstocks like pistachio shells. What's the best technology? So grain is leveraging digitization first and foremost, just to make sure everybody has equal access in an agnostic manner to understand, how do I approach this project? What are the revenue streams? And then how do I think about the capital stack? So we're driving down costs of things like life cycle assessments, project design documents, the compliance you need in order to do these projects. It should not be the cost structure that it currently was to do a project. We'll still bring the human capital and expertise to the table, but you've got to digitize those elements. And the second, Jill, is sorting of waste. So leveraging AI, there's a company, Amp Robotics, who we've worked with and partnered with in the past, that is sorting waste at a rate that is unlike anything that we've seen before. I think they've got a 99% accuracy level, and what's happening is we're reducing costs 10 to 15%, and then revenues are going up substantially. And that's one of the biggest things I tell a lot of our project developers. At the end of the day, think about what you can do to drive down your operating costs.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to come down to scale.
It's going to come down to scale.
Make it more affordable, more efficient. It's no secret that a number of subjects related to climate, it's a highly polarized topic. How do you see regulators responding? Are they open to PPP, public-private partnerships, to advance this? How are they perceiving this?
In a way, companies are getting forced into it, whether they like it or not. So here in the US, we've got 8 states that have passed EPR, Washington State being the most recent. Connecticut has EPR on the books now that they're deeply considering. Regardless of your stance, if you plan on participating in the US, you need to take those into consideration. In the UK, their version of the EPA, DEFRA, just passed a regulatory framework that will solicit fines and taxes starting in next year, 2026. So anyone who operates on the global stage already will see a financial impact that is concrete and real beginning in the next 12 months.
Yeah, and Jason, you're having conversations in DC to help advance this and advocate for tackling the climate issue.
Been very active in that. Obviously, to Tony's point, the states are going to play a massive role. We look at SB 253 and 261, certainly, which was the beachhead out of California, which really defines what's going to happen in terms of Scope 3 reporting. And as I always say, figuring out how to decarbonize the supply chain is critical. Value chain players have never had more optionality in their life to switch companies based on how they're treated and how they're supported by the major company. It's an A, B, and Bev, it's a Pepsi or Coca-Cola. And in Washington, my discussions really around, biochar and waste to value more broadly has been quite positive. What people don't realize is a lot of these projects are happening in red districts, just like a lot of the IRA money was going to red districts. And they're trying to figure out, all right, how do we align with Senator Grassley and Bozeman to think about the Biochar Research Network Act and also prevent forest fires and all the other things that are critical to those communities to not only create jobs, but get the next generation involved in supporting the future. It's the few that feed the many.
See, which is interesting because it's great that you're able to have that conversation and understand who your audience is so that you get that buy-in. And when you start talking about the circular economy, upskilling, educating, it's certainly attractive to their constituents. The challenge, though, when you hear about more regulations, as you were saying, there's 8 states that are being super proactive with this, then you start to hear, oh, it's not business friendly. The environment makes it more challenging. So there's a fine line to balancing that.
And the big thing, I'll give you an example, because we've talked about biochar a bunch. Traditionally, biochar and gasification at the state level was kind of grouped in with incineration, combustion, traditional combustion. So removing some of the permitting pain points that we've seen, Jill, that has been a benefit. The new administration has opened up those discussions to be more business friendly, because you go to a state like Indiana or Oklahoma, they're like, if we don't get this permitted in 30 days or 2 months, we'll pay for it, as an example. So states need to be competitive. They need to come to the table. And this new administration on the permitting side, at least for some of this work that we're talking about, is being more open about that.
And I would suggest don't underestimate the resiliency of capitalism, right? Like, regulatory framework is nothing new. The entrepreneurs among us know what it takes to succeed. Yes, these are complex challenges, but they can be overcome and they can be successful doing so.
It's interesting, going back to the conversation of understanding who your audience is, it's almost like, let's use blockchain as an example. It was associated with cryptocurrency from the jump. Perhaps calling it global warming in the beginning versus climate change could have changed the perception as well, because it's not just about the planet getting warmer, right? So I think the industry, whether it's climate tech or the regulators or academia as well, which is a big participant in the R&D, is understanding how to convey this buy-in in a very different way. And not just as it relates to climate, but a lot of many industries. We could use digital assets again as an example, leveraging these emerging technologies and being able to get that buy-in by understanding who your audience is.
And I think it takes us back to the very beginning, where maybe sustainability is the inappropriate moniker at this point. It really needs to look at active resiliency, regenerative. What are the things it means for my business, my community, my corporation, and my country?
And Jill, I'll just add on that, on the importance of educational institutions. The states that have moved the fastest, just look behind the scenes. LSU has played a massive role in the state of Louisiana. Cornell, they've got a pyrolysis unit on site. They're thinking about regenerative ag. Look at Nebraska, Minnesota, which is hosting the National Biochar Conference this year. They're doing a pyrolysis unit at the municipal level, and they're leveraging the state universities and institutions. So what I have learned in this, and obviously I've done a lot of work in public-private partnerships, those are key, but you've got to bring the educational institutions to the table as well.
Which is interesting, because we had Lincoln, Nebraska, the Chamber of Commerce and associated academic institutions on yesterday. Sports tech, which was interesting, how they're an incubator there, but of course ag tech was another area. And I think the importance of the role of academia and R&D cannot be understated. It's not as if you're a private company and you have trade secrets or proprietary data. This is data that's shared in an open source way that's helping to advance, not only that, but they're incubators for startups and so forth.
It's a proving ground for the next set of entrepreneurs and their next innovation set. Absolutely.
All right, appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.